This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to History Teachers Talking Podcast. Tom, I think we have a pretty interesting one today.
Yeah, always.
As always. You know, one thing I found out doing this research is the fact that the biggest enemy of any soldier seems to be sleep. You know,
Yeah.
so
It's
right?
also an enemy when you have two young kids. It's also something that you don't really
Indeed.
experience that often. But yeah, sleep is definitely something that soldiers have to deal with, that fatigue, because it's not just physical, it's also mental. And then what we'll be looking at today is basically ways that the governments and militaries have tried to avoid sleep, to help soldiers avoid sleep in many different ways, almost creating what would be called a super soldier, right?
Exactly. So what we're going to run through, as Tom pointed out, is we're basically going to look at history's quest to create a super soldier. We're going to start with World War II. We're going to talk about Russia. We're going to talk about the Nazis. Then we're going to get into like DARPA initiatives in the United States and kind of run through, like 20th century, more or less, of experiments to create super soldiers. And then we'll get to more common and current, not common, that's the wrong word, but more current quests to create a super soldier that we are still attempting to, create today.
In different ways, yeah. This
Different
isn't.
ways.
We don't want people to think this isn't like being hooked up and blasted with gamma rays and Vita rays. It's not It's not Captain America type stuff here.
Yeah.
But they were trying to increase strength, so I guess in a way it was like strength.
I was going to say it kind of was, right?
It kind of was, yeah. But it's not like that extreme. It's not like comic book, because everyone's always like, "Oh, you have a comic book podcast." No, we don't have a comic book podcast. It's
yeah.
don't have that.
This is history.
Yes.
One thing I kind of also want to just kind of bring up, that some of the stuff we talk about today might be a little sensitive for our youngest viewers. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I guess with some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Some of the stuff, yeah.
Some of the Nazi experiments and everything, definitely.
So I figured I'll throw that in there. So I guess we'll go back to World War II and start this quest for a super soldier. I wanted to kind of start it with Russia, if that's okay, Tom.
Yeah.
Russia's got some interesting, scientific things. Did you read the 1920s after World War I? They try to create like half ape babies. It was like five. They actually got 5 women to agree to this.
They were going to do it. Well, I have a lot of the stuff. What basically happened with him was that Stalin wanted he was interested in the idea of creating hybrids. They were this was a big thing. And Russia had a scientist that was he was Ilan Ivanovich Ivanov. Probably saying that a little bit wrong. And what he basically he was the number one animal breeder, mostly for like racehorses and horses and stuff in the Soviet Union, in Russia. And he was famous for, he tried to create a human ape hybrid, because he was also trying to prove Darwinism was correct. He's trying to prove that theory of evolution was correct, that we evolved from apes in some way, shape, or form. And therefore, since we evolved from apes and we share so much DNA, that a human ape hybrid would be possible. And he actually artificially inseminated several female orangutans with human sperm in an attempt to do it, but none of the pregnancies took, as you were saying, Peter. And they actually had like 5 women volunteer. I'm not sure how much they were volunteered, in the Soviet government back then.
It is Soviet Union, yeah.
But they did agree to be artificially inseminated with orangutan DNA. But the orangutan Tarzan actually passed away before they could get any DNA from him. And then after that, when there were some purges, he kind of lost favor with Stalin. That was the end of it. But the idea was to create these ape-human hybrids. And hopefully, the idea was what Stalin was kind of got caught up with. Well, we have to do we always say this, right? We have to do a podcast on this guy. We should do one on Stalin at some point. Just all his like weird, his weird mindsets and like the psychosis of Stalin.
Fear, psychosis, yeah.
Yeah, because his idea was like, listen, if we can have a soldier with the strength of an ape, right? But with a human intelligence. At some level. He also wanted them to be very obedient. That's what he was hoping too, that they could be trained. But with human intelligence, but the strength of an ape, how would you stop that? And that was really he thought this would be amazing. Obviously, it didn't happen. Hopefully it didn't happen. But there's a lot of rumors. If you go online and just start like researching this, that even though they say that it didn't work, that in some there's some individuals that say no, this did work. This guy, it did work. He was able to inseminate and give. They did give birth to some sort of human ape hybrid, and a lot of the clergy got upset with that because what does that mean for like religion if something like that did happen?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I
So and
think a
there's
lot of things we're going to talk about today are ethics are,
ethics is a
you
big
know,
problem. Yeah, but
huge
theoretically,
behind.
it is possible for that to happen. And there's been over the years so many different like with Human Z, that whole experiment, Oliver to Human Z. So go home,
Mhm.
type that into your Google machine, and you'll see that
Google
pop up.
machine.
You'll see that pop up because they definitely show that. But it was very interesting, yeah, to create these. This is one of the first attempts, and somewhat of creating some sort of super soldier, this human ape hybrid. I'm sorry if I kind of commandeered
No,
that
no,
name, but
that's perfect.
I remember hearing about this a long time ago. I was like, oh yeah, we got so we've thought of this topic. It's like, yeah, I definitely want to research this a bit
Well, like, and
more.
kind of sticking with the Soviet Union, did you get into the idea of they were trying to implant gold electrodes into people's brains to eliminate
Yes,
the pain center?
I was reading that and I wasn't sure if that was real or not. I
So
was like,
apparently, there's a historian, Jeff
yeah,
Strasberg,
yeah.
that did his research on this, and he said he found ample evidence, enough evidence at least, to say that between 1936 and 1941, yeah, the Soviets were trying to implant gold electrodes into the brains of people to eliminate the pain center, or at least to mess with the pain center in the brain.
Yeah. Well, it goes to I found the news report coming from like the Russian government at that time, and it says that they want a new invincible human being, insensitive to pain, resistant, and indifferent about the quality of food they eat. Like that was kind of like that was like their goal, like objective. So whatever they had to do to get that objective, they were willing to do.
Hmm.
And like whether it's gold electrodes, human ape hybrids, whatever they had to
Yeah.
do.
And this one kind of sounds like, the Winter Soldier here, but did you read about the experiments of trying to replace like healthy limbs and bones with titanium implants in soldiers? They would actually try to change bones and put titanium in there for soldiers to kind of resist breaking.
It's like almost Wolverine, basically.
Yeah, that they were basically trying to create Wolverine. And at first I was like, okay, this is a little odd, but then, maybe this isn't really true. But then I started kind of researching a little bit. Again, disputed, but there is evidence to prove that this does exist. And even there's some Nazi intelligence that the Soviets were trying to create these super soldiers using titanium for bones as well as gold electrodes in the brains. And apparently, this was happening in the Brest region. It was actually bombed by the Nazis once Operation Barbarossa started and the Nazis invaded Russia. Apparently, the Nazis did try to target this a program. But anyway, what's also interesting here is that there was evidence of American allies captured like a secret military facility in Germany where they actually found a lot of Soviet troops that had their bones replaced with steel limbs. And what they found on those was actually like a serial code number. And it was also written next to it, there was writing in Russian, which made them believe that these bones and these experiments were actually not German experiments. They were Soviet experiments that the Germans were trying to recreate, which is kind of interesting.
Well, both sides were doing stuff like this on prisoners. Whoever they
Yeah.
captured, they would put them on the like freezing or
Hmm.
various methods, warming them up, freezing them, understand how the body reacted to those things. They were exposing to
Yeah.
low and high pressures, all these things, poison, just to see how it would affect them and then just treat them one way or other. So what they could do later on. And so it's really not that hard of a progression to really think about, all right, let's replace the bones and see if we can do that.
Yeah.
It's what else can we pump into these people and see how it works. And the prisoners of war were really like live guinea pigs, basically, that they were
Yeah.
testing during this time. Yeah.
There's a physician, Sergei Konovalenko, I think is his name. Is in 1994 he kind of raised some red flags. So he said that he was able to locate and find a skeleton, an old cemetery that essentially this was near a river, and the river kind of washed out the grave, and the body came up, and he was surprised to find that the bony skeleton was connected with metal limbs. And they had hinges and stuff. And in one specific place, he actually said it was an inscription. It said Kharkov 05-35. And he was like, whoa, what is this? But then apparently someone stole it from him. Like someone actually stole this body from him before he got a chance.
You always hear about these things. Like, who decides to steal these things? Is it like
A
Is this some
government? I
random
mean,
person, or
right?
is it, yeah, like a government agency? Like, make sure this doesn't happen. You always hear these little we found it, but someone stole it. Well,
Nuts.
if it's and I'm a very much a skeptic for a lot of these conspiracy theories type of things.
Yeah.
But like I'd be open to it. But like you have it, and it's just going to prove your theory. Put it somewhere that's not going to get stolen. Like
Yeah.
guard it.
And this is the 90s.
Keep it under your bed at night. Like I don't understand how you put it somewhere where someone can just take it. If this is going to like prove, take pictures of it. It's the '90s, exactly. They have a
Yeah.
thing called cameras. So
Right.
I don't know. It's
There's
just
also a video. There's also a video. I guess it was an old reel, like a newsreel from the 40s, where again these are Soviet experiments, and supposedly this newsreel did exist. At least someone claims that they had it or seen it. Where you're looking at there's operations that were done on soldiers where the pain center was suppressed with the gold things, and essentially they said that they would expose these soldiers to these like brutal tests, and they would cut them and all kinds of stuff, and these guys were just like smiling in a video like they had no pain, which again supposedly this video exists or this film exists, but no one has seen it. I don't know, do you have anything else for Soviets?
well, the big thing that I found with the Soviets was in an article talking about how the Germans invade. I talked about before it, Operation
Yeah.
Barbarossa. Said you can't take Russia with crystal meth, and we'll get to that. The whole Nazis'
Hmm.
involvement in crystal meth. But it said, meanwhile, the Soviets preferred vodka. And it was one of these things that basically what this particularly in like Stalingrad, Leningrad, a lot of these places, the Soviets would issue a certain amount of vodka to their soldiers as part of their rations, and they were encouraged to drink it as much as possible. And you had a
Hmm.
quote from a Soviet colonel saying, "When our soldiers find alcohol, they take leave of their senses. You can't expect anything from them until they have finished their last drop. If we hadn't had the drunkenness like this, we would have beaten the Germans 2 years ago." So that's something that it's kind of like they were giving it to them to self-medicate, to kind of like forget it, but then they would also
It
find it
backfired.
around. It kind of backfired. And you're going to see that with a lot of what we're talking about today is that, yeah, they work in the short term, some of these drugs and some of these techniques, but they have long-lasting health effects on the individual, and they probably wind up hurting the war effort too. Because what happened is these soldiers become addicted to it and they can't get it. That becomes a problem. But yeah, that a
Yep.
lot of the Russian soldiers were drinking basically, and it makes sense when you think about it, the
Yeah.
horrors that they were experiencing, and it just like delayed a lot of it and resulted in more deaths because they're basically fighting. They're not on their full senses. They might not feel the pain, but it's still messing with them physically and psychologically in different ways.
I guess we should jump over to the Nazis, right?
This is where it
And
gets crazy, yeah, because
yeah, this
they
one gets crazy. And you kind of touched upon some of this before. The Nazis had racial experimentation, to try to prove that they were the master race. They had like war injury experimentation of, all right, well, our soldiers, how can we make sure that our soldiers withstand anything that's really thrown at them? Then they had like pharmaceutical testing. Altogether, all of this was done on prisoners. A lot of times the prisoners were Jewish. A lot of these tests were done at concentration camps, but not all the time. There was the idea of high altitude experiments, right? To see how long people could, or their soldiers or their pilots could withstand the loss of air pressure.
because
So,
these are the time. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this
yeah,
is
go.
before pressurized air cabins. They had some suits
Yep.
that you would wear, but as these planes were going higher and higher to avoid the anti-aircraft fire, things of that
Hmm.
nature, it's colder. The air is thinner. The human body can only take so much.
Yep.
It's still an issue that they have today, like with the fighter jets that go
Yeah.
faster than sound and stuff like
Yeah.
that. People pass out. The fighter pilots, yeah, when we do
Yeah.
this, we pass out. Like, what? Like, you can only take so
That's what
many
I did.
G's. Yeah, you can only take so. Yeah, you would pass out. So they
Yeah.
find ways and try to avoid that. And one way
And the
is
key
going to
was
be,
also to see at what point would they pass out. So they would
yeah,
take prisoners, they would put them in these pressure chambers, and to replicate what might happen at high altitudes. And oftentimes it led to death. They were trying to play with death. It's like, at what point
where was the breaking
uh,
point?
when is the
How
breaking
much could
point
the
for my
human body
pilot?
endure?
Exactly. And I was trying to make stronger, better pilots. And then, as you mentioned before, the freezing experiments, treatment for hyperthermia. They would put people in tanks of ice water for hours to kind of see, okay, how long will it take for my soldier, if he's shot down in the freezing waters, to survive? Okay, what can we do to improve that? Then you have the idea of pharmaceutical testing. Same thing is, you want to create medicine to kind of counter diseases, but also they would essentially poison people and then try to work on antidotes. Like, all right, if my soldier is being pressured or interrogated and they give him some form of medication, what can he do or take to counter the effects of that medication?
They are using human guinea pigs for this.
Yep.
Prisoners of
Oh,
war.
even something as insane as, like amputating people's legs and
Sewing them back on. Yeah, they were doing that. Sewing
exactly.
amputations, transplants, and all this stuff winds up later on. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. Here we go again. Uh, we get that information. Like we make a deal with a lot of, I know the Japanese war criminals with 7 Unit 31, and a lot of the German ones say, all right, we won't prosecute you for some of these war crimes that you've definitely committed if you just give us this information, because it is valuable medical research. It's ones that
Yeah.
you could never do in a Western democracy. You would never get away with that.
Yep.
But they're like, well, you already did it. We have the information. And then a lot of that does usher in. I'm not saying, the ends justify the means, but it is
Yep.
there. And that's how a lot of the medical advancements that come in the 50s come from a lot of this stuff. It's a dark point of history that ushered in a huge advantage, but was it how it happened? A lot of people don't know.
Yep. I mean, the Japanese also, with regards to, since you kind of touched upon that, they also try to really test vitamin A and their
Mm-hmm.
ability for their pilots to see better. So they would like inject their pilots with excessive amounts of vitamin A, kind of like good old carrots, to see
Yeah.
if it would improve their ability to see further. And there were some tests that were done that actually proved that was indeed successful.
At some level,
So
yeah. Yeah.
at some level, yes.
All right, let's get into some of
Let's.
these, what the Nazis were
Yep.
doing as far
Yep.
as.
What do you got?
Well, the main one, I'm sure you found it too. I'm probably going to butcher the name a little bit, right? But by
Oh,
1940,
sorry.
they were trying to basically invade France, right? We know
Mm-hmm.
about this. We're not going to do a history lesson here. So a lot of the long missions, the bombing missions, they want to try to like ward off sleepiness and hunger if their planes were shot down. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a drug called Pervitin. You
Yeah.
saw that, right?
Pervitin. Yeah, it is Pervitin.
Pervitin. It was basically crystal meth, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's everything
Yep,
what I
it
was
was.
reading. And it was also the year of the Blitz, and a lot of they're saying that the reason the Nazis were so relentless and devastating with these bombing attacks was because they were fueled by this essentially crystal meth speed, and it was just keeping them awake all the time, and it's also increasing their aggression big time. So
Mm-hmm.
the soldiers didn't have fear; they didn't have that human nature of like maybe I shouldn't be charging at this machine gun nest, and so it was like and like all guns out, the blazing forward, and they didn't have fear, and if they did get shot, they didn't feel pain. So it
Mm-hmm.
worked really well. Again, it's going to have lasting effects later on in the war. And the British were aware of this. They were aware that the Germans were taking these tablets. There was over 3 million of these German soldiers, and they each one had, there was about 35 million of these tablets that were sent to them in April of June of 1940 when they
Mm-hmm.
were, performing these blitz.
First time the Nazis actually used these performance drugs was at the Olympics in 1936. Um, Benzodrine, is the idea, which is essentially, it wasn't as dangerous as Pervitin, but that's kind of what started it. Is
They
Benzodrine.
saw what it could do, the
Yeah, and they're
benefits.
like, okay, these guys are like, they could outrun the average Joe, and they're not as tired. They don't tire easily. They're stronger. It's like, okay, let's work with this, and that's kind of what evolved into this Pervitin. But even when they started to realize that Pervitin was, because at first it was kind of seen as like a recreational drug. It's like a pick me up drug, and then they realized, all right, this is kind of really addictive. Um, but again, it was
It was very
imperative for
effective.
them to
Like it
use that.
allowed
Yeah.
them. It allowed them at. We all heard of Dunkirk, right? They made the movie
Mm-hmm.
Dunkirk, and we hear about
Yep.
the evacuation, but it was also a big military victory for the Nazis. When you think about it, they drove the French and the British armies off of mainland Europe, right?
Yep.
The Germans marched and fought for 10 consecutive days. And a lot of these papers I was reading saying that if they didn't have this drug, those tablets, they would not have been able to do that. Because all those soldiers fighting at Dunkirk, the German ones, were all pumped full of basically speed. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what allowed them to just march day and night and fight for 10 consecutive days. That the human body shouldn't be able to do that, but because they were so like pumped up on drugs, they were able to do it. So it's a direct connection there.
There is, and this really kind of became a big deal, at least historically, in like 2000s. I mean, that's really when a lot of these studies were made that look back at these events. Um, that kind of let us know the extent to which in the German army really was drugged up. But the U.S. soldiers in North Africa in 1942, they were also operating under influence of speed. You
And the
know,
British, yeah, it started. I read when a German pilot was shot down, and they
that's
found
how
it.
they find out.
They
Yep,
found it, and they're like, "Oh, if they're doing it, that's how they're able to be like." They're always wondering how they're surviving these G forces, with like the
yep,
dive bombers and stuff like that. And they kind of found it out. So they're like, "All right, how can we give our soldiers a chemical advantage?" So they started supplying them with something similar,
yep, yep.
and it was
Yeah,
given at the discretion of the medical officer. So it wasn't everyone, apparently. It was just like, all right, you're doing on a more longer mission. It was a form of
yep,
inhalers. I saw it wasn't tablets; it was inhalers, I believe, for the
yep.
British and the Americans at
Yeah,
first.
there's a memo that came out in 1942 by from a British commanding officer that stated that the British 24th Armored Tank Brigade, right before the Battle of Egypt, each person in a tank brigade, the 24th, received 20 milligrams of benzotrine per day.
Benzodrine, yeah,
Yeah, which is the Royal Air Force was already getting them, but they were getting about 10 milligrams. This doubled it because it's like, it's a big invasion. This is really important. So, like, let's give you more drugs. And Ike was very, very much okay with this as well. I mean, and they say that the United States was more interested in, in these drugs for their increased aggression and confidence, as you mentioned before. It was about boosting morale more so even than staying awake.
yeah.
Because what these drugs do is they keep you awake,
But he said it doesn't
but
stop you from feeling tired.
exactly, like
Like
you're
your
still
body, yeah.
tired.
That
Yep.
was a big difference between the Allied drugs and the Nazi drugs, from what I saw.
Hmm.
The Nazi drugs, you wouldn't get tired because you were just ramped up the whole time. But
Yep.
the British and American drugs weren't quite as dangerous. I guess the dosage or what they were
That's
using
what it
was a little
was.
bit
Yeah, it was a
different.
different type. It was supposed to be not as bad for the soldier, but although it prevented a soldier from going to sleep and got him angry, it actually made they were still tired. You
Yeah,
know.
the body still craves sleep. You just couldn't fall asleep. So eventually, they came a point they were saying where the soldier would just come off the drug for they wouldn't use the drug for like a day or two, and they would just
Yeah.
collapse, and they because they just couldn't stay awake anymore. They would literally just collapse and sleep
Yep.
because they finally was out of their system and their body just shut down.
Anything else you have?
One more thing, that was a new type of drug that the Germans were trying to use towards the very end of the war. It was
Mm-hmm.
after D-Day and everything. It was called D9 or DIX,
Mm-hmm.
and it was designed to redefine the limits of human endurance. And it was a new type of pill and was supplied to some German troops before the war ended, but it couldn't go into mass production. And what it basically did was it actually increased their reaction time. It was a combination
Mm-hmm.
of all these different types of things they were basically using. Um, and it did provide the users, it said, with superhuman strength. I'm not talking about picking up cars and stuff like that, but it basically increased their aggression, so it also increased their strength. It also it's a big boost of self esteem, and it kept them awake for days.
Yep.
It was basically laced with oxycodone, so you can imagine how addictive it was. Also,
Yeah.
um, and the German researchers were testing at certain concentration camps, and what they found out is that in the people in the concentration camps who are already, unfortunately, emancipated, weak, they could march in a circle up to 90 kilometers per day without rest while carrying a 20-kilogram backpack.
Yeah, I
So
saw that.
so it was able to, so it worked. It was just never able to put into massive effect before the war ended. But this was really something that Hitler thought was going to be his like saving grace. That was going to help win the wars. If we start giving these to our soldiers, it's going to make one German soldier equal to like 20 Allied soldiers. That was basically the idea. But it
Yeah.
never went into mass production. I was trying to find stuff about where it is now, or if it's used and stuff like that. It's basically speed and cocaine mixed together with a few other added
Yeah.
chemicals
Yeah.
thrown in there.
And then let's add a gun to it. Like here you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, let's get these psychopaths that are about to, lose a
Oh man.
war. Because the ones that were going to take it, these were going to be the Nazi like SS soldiers. These were not your
Yeah.
average everyday soldiers. These were going to be the ones that were really indoctrinated with that Nazi fascism, the superiority, racial superiority. Exactly. Let's pump them up with a drug that's going to make them even more out of their mind, and then give them
Yeah.
give them machine guns.
I think that's a cool segue too. Like when you said, the SS soldiers. How about Lebensborn? Do you remember that program? I mean, I think that kind of fits in this
Yeah,
mold,
yeah, yeah.
where they
I
try
saw
to
that.
create like the perfect Aryan race. So they
Basically,
would
just
literally,
yeah. Good.
yeah, they would take these young women, and these young women would sign up in Germany for this program where they would have them. They would essentially breed people.
That's what it
They
was.
would
Yeah, they need to
yeah.
repopulate the world after the Germans won. That was the idea.
Yep. So they would have these young women, and they would have them get together with these ultra high ranking intelligent officers to try to create these perfect Aryan SS babies. Again, this was like, I guess it's genetics in a sense, right? Because they're not directly messing with genes, but they are breeding people for a
Well, they're
specific
looking to
purpose.
see two individuals which have the whole Aryan ideal that the Nazis had, and it was
Hmm.
the whole idea was to have children for the Reich, and it was put them together and have them have babies, and then the husbands were the fathers were not involved in the child raising at all. It's basically,
Nope.
all right, you're
Yep.
pregnant, you have a baby, that's great. Here's the baby. There was nurses that would tend to it, and then once the woman was ready, she's gonna have another baby. Like it was basically like factory, more or
Yep.
less.
No, that's basically what it was. Yep.
The idea was to have these children, and there are children. There was individuals who are adults now who were born during that time. Like they were bred to be part of this next Aryan race. That was their
Yep.
purpose. I know there's a whole documentary on that in Germany about these individuals, just what their life was like when they really when they realized that.
And I remember actually seeing that documentary years ago, and the one lady was, was chuckling because she was putting glasses on to read something, and she's like,
Yeah, she's
"See,
like,
like
yeah,
my,
my eyes aren't perfect. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, my eyes aren't perfect." Um, all right, so I guess we can move on. The United States it's not necessarily immune to these
no,
trials. So the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, basically DARPA, right? So DARPA's offices have been trying to create, um, you know, make soldiers that are almost kill proof, all sorts of conditions, infectious diseases, chemical, biological, radioactive weapons, temperature and altitude extremes, harsh natural environments. Like they're trying to create super soldiers. DARPA's been trying to do this since the 40s. And, while Nazi Germany fell and, nothing came out of it, um, the DARPA continued. I mean, it continues to this day. They're still trying to create super
they're still
soldiers.
trying to do these things. I know there was a ban on giving American soldiers amphetamines and stuff like that, but it
Hmm.
only lasted for 5 years. I think it went in effect in 91 and stopped in 96.
Yeah.
I know we can talk about obviously Korea, Vietnam, Kuwait, but the big one I saw was they were giving a lot of soldiers on a voluntary basis these chemical concoctions to protect them during the first Persian Gulf War in case Saddam Hussein released any poison gas. They were
Hmm.
these pills that were supposed to protect you from poison gas and basically like a super nutritional pill is what it was called.
Oh wow,
So that's sort of
that's
thing. I saw
intense.
that DARPA is also looking into ways to make soldiers, yes, smarter and stronger, and they're even looking into modifying soldiers' genes, like which soldiers are more resistant to certain diseases. So is there a way to replicate that and give it to other soldiers? That's one of the things they're looking at. Yeah, yeah.
There also is a drug they're testing, I'm again pronouncing this wrong, but it enables soldiers to stay awake for about 40 hours. That's the whole sleep thing comes in again.
Yeah, because they don't want you
Um,
sleeping. When I say that,
yeah,
like the breast, when a soldier's sleeping, the soldier can't be fighting. The soldier can't be doing anything, and that's manpower that's not there. So the idea, if the longer we can have them fighting, the longer we can have them being a soldier. If our enemy's not doing, that's going to be the advantage. Now, it's all about
yep,
getting advantage. It's all about how we're going to win, and
yep.
it's the more you think
Well,
about it, it makes sense they would do
this
this,
drug is
but
being
it's
tested.
crazy.
This drug is actually being tested right now. It allows the soldiers to stay awake for 40 hours straight without any ill effect, supposedly. Um,
Again, this guy. I mean, I don't know how you can stay up for 40 hours and not have some. There's not going to be any effects on you.
did you look into the whole idea of psychics? Like the Pentagon spent about
Oh,
$20 million
that was that
testing.
movie. That was that movie. Remember that movie with George Clooney? The what was it called? The men who stare at goats.
Yes.
And that was
Yep.
all. That is based on a true story. It was all about
Yeah.
they were called like the Jedi Knights or something like that.
Yeah.
And its whole
It
idea
was
was
like
like psychic training, astral
that's what it was.
projection. Yeah,
Extrasensory powers. Like they were
yeah.
trying to see if they could have extrasensory powers. $20 million of your taxpayers' money between 1972 and 1996 went into this idea of, they would have these remote viewers that would try to envision geographical locations, that they have never seen before, like nuclear facilities, bunkers, foreign lands. And they would like sit them down and be like, can you see where this may be? Um, Again, the name of the project I think was like Stargate, Grill
Yeah.
Flame Stargate, and eventually it was abandoned in 2002. But it was an idea of try to create extra sensory people, soldiers.
Yeah, but you
I
think
thought
it
that
was
was
really abandoned? Like, who knows? Like, it could have. They say it's abandoned, but it could still be some black
yeah,
book operation still working. Maybe it worked. Who knows? I mean, stuff like that is one of
yeah,
those just crazy things, actual projection and mental powers. But again, they're trying to make those super soldiers, and it comes up with. I was reading this interesting, I guess, essay that individuals posted online. It was like kind of like a thread, and it was, is doing this, trying to make super soldiers, is it ethically, should it be allowed? And the idea is people are
yeah,
arguing, well, doping in sports is illegal, so why should it be allowed to be doping in
yeah.
military
In
purposes? So
military
it's one of those interesting beliefs. And what some of the
paradigms. Yeah.
yeah, one of the responses was like, doping in sports doesn't produce any meaningful benefit to society, but
Hmm.
using drugs to improve the performance in the military could save lives, and it could also make easier for the missions to be completed, and it helps your country win the conflict. You kind of, like we talked about some of those weird weapons of war in one of our previous podcasts.
Hmm.
You do what you have to do to try to win.
Yeah.
So the other rules of war, yeah, but the rules of war only happen if you lose the war. If you
Yeah.
win the war, you're not going to trial yourself. So
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yep.
American pilots weren't put on trial for the bombing at Dresden and stuff,
Right.
things of that nature. So I don't know.
Well,
It's kind of one of those interesting, like you're saying, little quagmires, paradigms, whatever you want to call it. Like, is it morally wrong to dope up these soldiers, whether they know it or not? Some are volunteers, some don't know what they're taking. A lot of times,
yeah.
you're a soldier. Your commanding officer says, "All right, take these pills, do this." You're going to do it. Like, that's how you're conditioned. That's how you're trained.
Well, kind of don't know what to take it. How about between 1955 and 1972, the LSD,
Yeah,
and PCP and pot research with drugs and soldiers. I mean, you have U.S. Army volunteers are taking pot, acid, angel dust to kind of see what effects that these
that would
drugs
have.
have
Yeah,
on them. They try to actually create artillery rounds that would disperse like powdered hallucinogens,
yeah, that
like
would make them
these
freak out.
drugs.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they think they were
Um,
fighting monsters, or they
and the
not even
same
see
thing.
what's coming. Yeah.
So when they were doing these research things, the idea was to train them to withstand that.
Well, wasn't LSD made as like a truth serum,
It was.
and
Yep.
then the researchers, some lab assistants, took it and started selling it on the streets,
Yep.
and then it became like a big issue. But like, it's supposed
Uh,
to just calm you down to the point where you just you just answer everything truthfully, because you can't even think to lie.
and interesting, in 1981, because this kind of became a big deal that when this came out, that we're experimenting soldiers and drugs, the National Academy of Sciences conducted a study in 81 and found that there was no ill effects from the testing. And therefore, like it was okay to test with LSD and other, hallucinogens.
They said no ill
Um,
effects, even though
yeah, they said it was like no real. I guess they're it's protecting
you
the
got.
military,
Well, yeah, but you also get addicted to it.
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you got
but I
the
think it was the
physical.
idea of like trying to protect the military.
Yeah.
Like it's
Oh
okay
yeah,
if they did these
it's
tests.
okay they did it. It's not. They're not hurting anybody.
Another thing that was done was the U.S. Air Force wanted to know how well pilots could survive high altitude jumps. Captain Joseph Kittinger was a test pilot, and he made these like Project Excelsior was the name of it in 1950s, and they tried to figure out, all right, how far can the pilot go and still eject and survive? So they would connect this guy into these like high altitude Excelsior balloons, and he would go up tens of thousands of feet.
Hmm.
Then he would jump. Third record breaking flight, right in 1960, took him up like almost 20 miles up in the air, and then he
Wow.
just kind of jumped. Yeah, they say he reached speeds of 614 miles per hour. Comparison, right? Speed of sound is 761 miles per hour. So he was at
So he
614.
was
He was
close. Yeah.
almost there. You know what I mean? And then the temperatures that he endured
Yeah,
when
I'm
he
saying,
jumped out.
just the heat coming down. He
Yeah.
must have.
But even like when he jumped out at the very top, right? Minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit when he jumped out. It's and then it just went, in the opposite heat. So again, Project Excelsior, let's try to make our pilots, right, have an advantage.
Well, it goes. Yeah, that's the height of the Cold War, right? So they're trying to figure out what the Russians are doing. What are we going to do? And that's still going on today with militaries around the world. I was saying,
Yeah.
I guess we can segue into our next part, like obviously they're still experimenting with drugs like we're talking about, but a thing that you're seeing now are the ideas of exoskeletons for military use.
Hmm.
Almost like that Iron Man type armor. I guess if we're using like the super soldier comparison with Captain America, you having these exoskeletons. And I was reading articles about how we're in basically a arms race with the Soviet Union right now. Well, sorry, the Russians right now. Um, over these things on which one is going to be more effective. And there's a bunch of different, like Lockheed Martin has the Onyx, which is this like system that's allowing basically soldiers so they can carry more weight with these. And it basically just looks like if you ever bust up your knee really bad, one of those like ones with like the ball bearings and everything, but you wear it around
Hmm.
and it's supposed to basically do the walking for you. Like it will walk for you. So you don't get tired. So then when you finally need to use your muscles yourself, you can just use it. You can carry like 80 pounds more weight.
Well,
So you have all these different ones that are out there. Eco boots, basically all those major not medical firms, military firms are making these exoskeletons. Like you're saying, like they help them jump as high as kangaroos and stuff like that. They can
that's the
lift
one I was looking
weights.
at. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
one was really interesting.
Hydraulics. Lockheed
Yep.
Martin has a bunch. Yeah,
Well, what they're trying to do is like try to get 7 foot leaps at like 25 miles per hour
yeah,
spring. You know, the scientists at MIT have been asked by the U.S. government to research these, and they're trying to augment human ankle and Achilles tendon. So they're trying to create these bionic boots that mimic kangaroo tendons. And it says like humans that are equipped with these boots would be able to leap 7 feet and sprint like at inhuman speeds
yeah.
without
That's
wearing
it.
out their muscles, which is a whole nother issue. It's again insane.
There's ones that allow them to like see in all directions at once. I'm looking at the
I
Talos
didn't see
suit.
that one.
Yeah, the Talos suit does that. There's another one that I saw that it's all bunch of basically these microscopic cameras, right? So
Hmm.
they're working where they're wearing this suit and it's all these cameras. It's a camouflage suit because what it does is it takes a picture of anything that's behind the soldier and it
Hmm.
projects it on the screens in front. So it gives this kind of like a blurred camouflage effect
Wow.
because you get what I'm saying? Like it's recording the picture
Yeah.
behind you, projecting it in front of you. So it's kind of like a cloaking device. So that's another like way to make a super soldier. Like you can sneak in and things of that nature.
Wow. Did you see the one about trying to create synthetic blood?
I didn't see I've heard of that before, but I didn't see any article. I didn't look at that up now.
Yeah, so they're
What's
they're
that?
trying to the U.S. government is DARPA really is trying to create a synthetic
DARPA.
blood, yeah, that would contain gases at pressures of nearly like 15,000
Oh, okay.
psi, and exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen the same way real blood cells do. But the premise of this is they would mix this with natural blood, right? So these super soldiers would have the synthetic blood mixed with them, and what it would do is it would infuse them with like trillions of miniature air tanks inside their body, meaning that they would really not run out of breath, and they could spend hours underwater without really other equipment. I mean, that's what they're trying to get to.
Trying to do, yeah.
But the first premise would be just to like you don't run out of breath, like you're just your blood
Well, it would
is
prevent that fatigue from
that's
happening too, I
oxygen.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that buildup that
So that I
causes
thought that was
fatigue.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's good. That would be one. That would definitely be something that I'm sure would be very useful in
Yeah.
military. Also in sports. Imagine that you don't get fatigued at all.
Yeah. Well, DARPA is also doing working on this persistence in combat initiative, where they're trying to have these pain immunizations. So they're trying to give people a shot that would work for about 30 days that would eliminate inflammation. Like your body would just really have no inflammation, and therefore, if you have an injury, you wouldn't necessarily be hurt. Inflammation is your body's natural response to
The thing,
to
that's just blocking the pain, right? So you're just
yeah.
blocking the pain. You're still gonna feel it. You're still gonna
Yeah. Yeah, so
have
the premise here is that you just
you're
it's kinda like
still
what
gonna have the
morphine
injury.
does.
You're still gonna have the injury. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess morphine would be an interesting thing to talk about, you know, if you think about, creating a super soldier when morphine came out. Not super soldier in a sense of but, like I'm gonna run and, knock down walls, but when you are hurt, the idea of just blocking out pain.
Blocking out the pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was always something. Think of the Civil War, right? When they would
Yep.
bite the bullet and cut off a limb.
Yep.
So like morphine just that's just an advance in medical technology that definitely helps it. But yeah, so it's just all these ways again they're trying to just make these soldiers better, super in some way. But is this morally acceptable? That's kind of like the question that I'm kind of finding. Like how much these
Yeah.
soldiers are aware of what they're doing. How much harm are you putting these individuals through? But is it morally acceptable? Because if it's going to benefit society, but it's also benefit. Let's be honest. If you're making a soldier more super, that just means they're going to be able to kill more people. I mean, that's
Yep.
war.
Yep.
So you can say, yeah, you're saving lives. Yeah, but you're saving lives of people on your side. You're not necessarily saving lives on the other side. So it's a very complicated dilemma, really, I feel.
Yep.
Everything, I remember a physics teacher I had in high school, he had a friend who, that's what he said anyway, that worked in the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, anything that you see in the movies or in like advertised by the military, anything they have, that's 20 years ago. That they have things that are, it's 20 years more than that. That you're just seeing this stuff now. And I look at the stealth fighter that was made in the 70s. It doesn't come out and be acknowledged until the Persian Gulf War in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So like anything that they have, they're not going to say, oh yeah, we have this, we have that. No, they're not going to tell you. It's going to be stuff from, way in the past that they developed years ago that they're showing. It's not going to be anything current. They're not going to show you currently what they're working on all the times,
See,
That's
my
what
physics teacher in high school thought he was abducted by aliens.
Well,
true story. He was actually told
fair
not
enough.
to like talk about it.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so naturally we would always be like, so what happened that night? He's like, I can't talk about it. But he was like really serious. Like
okay then. Interesting segue. When we will not be doing a podcast on alien abduction, though.
Yeah, no.
Let's stay away from that.
Do you have anything else?
No, that's really what I was finding. Like again, you do research, you're going to fall into these pits of, all right, what's real, what's not. That's what I was having a hard time. Like I've seen finding a lot of things, but I'm like, am I reading about like an actual program, or is this someone's book or someone's theory? Like I wanted to be very careful with not just throwing things out there that didn't have a lot of backing or didn't have a lot of that historical fact behind it, because you wanted to make sure that it's what we're talking about were real experiments or things that were really happening, not just rumors and conspiracy theories. But there's a lot out there. And even seeing some of the battles, like I knew the Germans were taking pills, but it was basically speed, crystal meth, and they were using, and we can have a whole podcast too. There that goes again on just the drugs that Hitler was taking. Yeah, towards the end of the war, the whole war, really, he was
getting shots like every day.
They had to get over 800 injections of some of these things. Yeah. Like he was constantly on these things, so it makes sense then that he would have the soldiers in his army doing the same thing.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess that kind of brings us to the end this week, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And we'll see you guys next week. Enjoy.
Have a good week. Have a good
Take
week.
care. I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.